I need to tell this the right way, so I'm going to start with the part I never put in any report. On my last week at Hensley Gap, I broke procedure. 4 other people would tell you nothing happened up there that winter, and they'd be telling the truth as far as the paperwork goes. The logs are clean. The incident forms are blank. If you pulled my file tomorrow, you'd see a quiet, seasonal posting that ended on schedule. No injuries, no search and rescue call-outs, equipment returned in good condition. On paper, I did my job and came home. I'm writing this at 3 in the morning because that's the only time I trust myself to be honest about it. My apartment doors are locked, both of them. I checked twice, which I know means nothing, and I checked anyway. Here's the thing I need you to understand before I go further. I was a paramedic for 11 years before I ever wore a ranger uniform. I've held people together with my hands while they died. I don't spook. I don't invent things to feel important. When I tell you what those 7 rules were for, I'm not asking you to believe in ghosts. I'm asking you to believe that a person can be trained her whole life to run toward the sound of someone crying, and then be given a job where the only way to survive is to sit still and let them cry. I still follow some of those rules. Down here, in a city, months later, with no fog and no ridge and no reason. That's what scares me most. So let me tell you how a burned-out medic ended up taking the emptiest job in the country. The call I can't put down was a pediatric one. I won't give you the details, because the details are mine, and I've paid enough for them. What matters is that for 4 seconds, I froze. 4 seconds where my training left me, and I just stood there. And by the time my hands remembered what they were for, I had decided, without any evidence, but completely, that those 4 seconds were the difference. My partner said they weren't. The report said they weren't. I stopped believing either of them. After that, every siren felt like an accusation. I'd get to a scene, and my chest would go tight before I opened the doors. This narrow, dry feeling like breathing through a straw. 11 years. And suddenly I couldn't trust the one instinct. The whole job was built on the instinct to move towards the person who needs you. So I looked for work where nobody's life would sit in my hands. I actually typed that into the search, more or less. Remote, solitary, low stakes. I found a winter monitoring pilot at a reopened ranger station in the southern Appalachians, a place called Hensley Gap. Weather logging, trail cameras, snow stakes. The listing practically apologized for how boring it was. 9 miles from the nearest paved road. No reliable signal. 1 person, 1 stove, 1 long, quiet season. I told myself I was going up there to heal. That was the lie I was comfortable with. The truth, the one I can only say now, is that I went up there to stop being a person who saves people. I wanted to be useless in a way that felt like rest. I got in the truck in early November and started up the road that only goes up. The service road to Hensley Gap doesn't wander. It climbs. 9 miles of switchbacks cut into the side of the ridge, gravel packed hard under a skin of frost. The kind of grade where you feel the truck working even in low gear. I remember the smell coming through the vents. Wet pine, cold mineral rock, wood smoke from somewhere I never located. Pretty. in the way this country is always pretty, the sort of view people drive hours to photograph. I lost my phone signal at mile 4. I'd been told I would, so I didn't think much of it. One bar, then nothing, then the little searching icon that never stops searching. The fog started around mile 6, not rolling in from anywhere, just there, pooled in the low folds of the slope like water that had forgotten which way was downhill. That was the first thing that didn't sit right. And I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to say, I knew something then. I didn't. I noticed it the way you notice a picture hanging slightly crooked. The wind was coming down the ridge, steady enough to lean the bare branches, and the fog was drifting against it. Uphill, into the wind. I told myself air does strange things on mountains. Thermals, pressure. I'd read that somewhere. Then I heard a truck horn behind me. One long note, close, the sound of a vehicle right on my bumper, wanting past. I checked the mirror. Empty road, empty switchback below that. 9 miles of nobody. Sound carries wrong up here, I decided. That was true, as it turned out. It just wasn't the whole truth. The station came out of the trees, all at once, stone and heavy timber, older and better built than it had any right to be. And a man was standing on the porch, not coming down to meet me. He was waiting on the porch when I parked, and he didn't come down the steps. That's the detail I keep returning to. 11 years of arriving at scenes taught me to read people fast, and everything about him read wrong for a simple handover. Wiry, maybe 50, a week of gray stubble, a duffel already at his feet. His truck sat with the tailgate down, and the back seat packed to the roof, not loaded, packed the way you pack when you're not planning to sort it later. I climbed the steps. He held out the keys before I reached him, and took a half step back, keeping himself above me. And I noticed he stayed on the top of the porch. He never once came down past the second step, even to shake my hand. He just extended his arm the extra distance, rather than close the gap. Boyd, he said, that was it for introductions. Danny Vasquez. I took the keys. Cold metal, 3 of them on a bent ring. You're leaving early. I thought the overlap was 2 days. You'll be fine. He glanced past me at the fog sitting in the low ground, then back. There's a card taped inside the door, laminated. Read it before dark. A card. Read it and believe it. He said believe, like it was load-bearing, like the whole sentence hung off that one word. He picked up the duffel. Don't overthink the ones that sound stupid. Those are the ones that'll get you. I almost laughed. I was tired. And this had the flavor of a prank the seasonals play on the new hire. Get me how? He didn't answer that. He went down the steps fast, threw the duffel across his packed seat, and got in. Through the windshield, he looked at me for a second longer than felt normal. 7:10, he said through the glass. Not 7. Then he was gone down the mountain, gravel spitting, faster than that road should be driven. I stood alone on the porch of my quiet, boring job, and I went inside to find the card. The inside of the station smelled like old paper and cold stone and the faint tar sweetness of a wood stove that had been run for decades. One room, mostly. A cot, a desk, a radio set, a cast-iron stove squatting on a slab hearth, shelves of logbooks gone soft with damp, It was warmer than outside, but not warm. And the light through the small windows was already going gray. The card was taped to the inside of the front door at eye level, exactly where Boyd said. Laminated, edges rounded and cloudy from handling. The plastic gone soft the way a thing gets when a lot of hands have touched it over a lot of years. The text was typed, not printed from a computer typed on a real machine, the letters pressed unevenly into the paper underneath. At the top was a faded circular stamp I couldn't fully read, something with a date in it, and the letters CCC. 7 rules. I read them, standing there with my coat still on. 1. Radio your check-in at 7:10 a.m., not 7 o'clock. If dispatch answers before you finish your call sign, do not respond. Hang up and wait for the 7:10 window to pass. 2. Anything you hear I crying, calling for help, or asking your name from below the tree line after dusk is not a person. Log the time. Do not log a location. Do not go down. 3. The trail register at Hensley Gap must show at least one new name each day. If it does not, write a name yourself before midnight. Never write your own. 4. If the fog rises above the second stone step of the porch, go inside and do not open any door until it recedes, even if you can see someone standing in it. 5. Swap the trail camera cards every 3rd day. If any card shows a photo of the station's front door taken from outside at night, do not sleep inside that night. Sleep in the truck. 6. Never let the wood stove go fully cold between November and March. If it dies, relight it before the next hour changes on the clock. Cold Stone remembers. 7. When your replacement arrives, hand them the card and leave before dark. Do not describe what happened. I read them twice. Then I took out my phone and photographed the card, mostly out of habit, and a little because I already knew I'd want to send it to someone as a joke about my strange new posting. That's the version of me I want you to remember, the one who thought it was funny. I'm good at explanations. It's a survival skill in emergency work. You walk into chaos, and you build a story fast enough to act inside it. So I stood there in my coat, and I explained the card to myself, rule by rule, until it stopped feeling like a warning, and started feeling like a checklist some old ranger had over-formalized out of boredom and superstition. The 7:10 window. Radio traffic gets scheduled. Somebody probably owned the 7 o'clock slot on the relay years ago, and this station got bumped 10 minutes, and it calcified into folklore. The crying below the tree line, coyotes. Anyone who's spent a night in the backcountry has heard a pack sound almost human, that rising catch that snags something in your chest. The register you have to keep full. Search and rescue formality and empty logbook makes a station look abandoned. And abandoned stations invite people to poke around and get hurt. The fog, the second step. That one I sat with a moment longer because it was so specific. But even that, I filed under liability theater. Don't go wandering in a whiteout. Fine. Reasonable. Dressed up spooky. The stove I actually agreed with. Pipes freeze. Cold kills. Keep the fire going. That's not a curse. That's Appalachia in January. Cold Stone remembers, though. I said it out loud in the empty room, and it came back off the walls a little flatter than my voice went out. I laughed, and the laugh did the same thing. I decided I'd follow the rules. Not out of fear, out of respect, the way you honor a checklist someone bled to write, even when you don't understand every line. Professional courtesy to whoever came before me. That's what I told myself as I fed the stove, watched it catch, and lay down on the cot with my boots by the door. I slept lightly that night. First night, in a strange place, I told myself. Morning would be my first radio check, my first real test of Rule 1. The first 2 days were the job I'd been promised, and I want to give them their due, because the ordinariness is the part why people skip, and it's the part that matters. Dread doesn't work without something to lose, and what I had to lose, briefly, was peace. Mornings started cold and blue. I'd wake before light, feed the stove, and stand in the doorway with coffee, watching the fog sit in the low ground, turning the color of skim milk as the sun came up behind the ridge. Then the work. I ran the generator on its schedule and logged the hours. I checked the propane. I walked the boundary markers, orange blazes on the trees at the edge of the station's ground, and confirmed each one against the map on the wall. I read the snow stakes and wrote the depths in the weather log, and phoned the numbers down at the 4 o'clock window to a dispatcher who sounded as bored as the job description promised. Every third day, I'd swap the trail camera cards. That was Rule 5's chore, though I wasn't thinking of it as a rule yet, just a task. 3 cameras on the approaches, weatherproof boxes strapped to trees. Pull the card, slot a fresh one, note the time. It was beautiful up there. I won't pretend otherwise. Frost feathering the window panes into ferns. A pair of ravens that worked the ridge every afternoon. The particular silence of high country in winter, which isn't empty so much as attentive, and the guilt loosened. That's the honest part. For the first time in months, my chest didn't tighten at the start of the day. No sirens, no doors to open onto someone's worst moment. Just steaks and logs and coffee and cold. By the third morning, I'd half decided the card was a joke Boyd had inherited and dutifully passed on. The way you keep telling a family story nobody remembers the point of. Then I got careless with the radio. It was day 3, and I was comfortable. And comfortable is how you get sloppy. I'd been logging snow depths and lost track of the clock. And when I sat down at the radio set, the display read 7:04. 6 minutes early. Rule 1 sat in the back of my mind, the way an unread email sits there, present, ignorable. I keyed the mic. Hensley Gap, to relay. Morning check. This is Ranger Va. Something answered before I finished my name. Good morning, Danny. Warm. That's the word that stuck. Dispatch phrasing. The cadence exactly right. That flat, friendly rhythm of someone who said the same greeting 10,000 times. But the dispatcher I'd talked to at 4 the day before had a tired, gravelly voice, a man who cleared his throat between sentences. This was not that voice. This was smooth, and it used my first name, and no one at the relay had ever called me anything but my call sign. I sat with my thumb on the key and didn't press it. The rule surfaced whole and clear. If dispatch answers before you finish your call sign, do not respond. Hang up and wait. Danny, it said, you cut out. Say again, your check. My hand was steady on the mic, which is its own kind of horror, the training holding my hand still, while everything under my ribs came loose. I took my thumb off the key. I set the mic down on the desk, carefully. The way you set down something you don't want to hear hit the surface. The radio breathed. Just once. A soft push of air across the speaker grill, like someone leaning close to a mic to say something and then deciding not to. I watched the clock crawl. At 7:10, exactly, the set crackled to life on its own schedule, and the tired gravel voice from the day before said, "Relay to Hensley Gap. You got a check for me," and cleared his throat. 2 voices. 2 different men, if the second one was even a man, and only one of them was real. I answered the 7:10. My mouth was dry. I told myself relay static does strange things, that I'd half dreamed the early voice, and even as I said it, I was reaching for the logbook to see who I'd actually been talking to. I couldn't let it go. That's the paramedic in me. When something doesn't add up on a scene, you chase it, because the thing that doesn't add up is usually the thing that kills your patient. So after the 7:10 check, I stayed on the line with the gravel voice dispatcher, and I asked him, as casually as I could manage, whether he'd tried to reach me a few minutes early. "Negative," he said. "Your window's 7:10. I don't touch the key before 7:10. That's your slot." A pause, a throat clear. "Why? You got interference up there?" "Maybe. Thought I heard someone." "Log it if it keeps up." He didn't sound curious. He sounded like a man who'd learned not to be. I asked him to check his system. "Humor me," I said. He sighed and did it, and I heard him tapping. And then he said the thing that took the floor out from under my rationalizations. There was no transmission logged at 7:04. Nothing at 7:04, 7:05, 7:06. His system stamps every open key on the frequency, every carrier, even dead air with no words. From my station that morning, there was one logged transmission all day, the 7:10. The early voice hadn't come through the relay, because the early voice had never touched the network. It had come out of my radio without going into anyone else's. It had answered on a frequency it wasn't broadcasting on, in a voice built to sound like the thing I'd trust. And it had used my name before I finished saying it myself. I sat in that stone room, with the cold coming up through the floor, and I finally read Rule 1 the way it was meant to be read. The 10-minute offset wasn't bureaucracy. It was a filter. The window at 7:10 belonged to the real relay. The minutes before, it belonged to something that fished in that gap, that answered early, precisely because a real dispatcher never would, and counted on a tired ranger being too polite or too rattled to notice. I'd noticed. This time, the professional calm I'd carried up the mountain, the thing I was proudest of. The thing 11 years had built. I felt it for what it actually was now. A shell. Thin. And under it, for the first time since I'd arrived, the old tightness came back into my chest. The straw breath feeling. Except there was no siren this time, and no scene to explain it. That night, right on schedule with the dark, the crying started below the tree line. Dusk up there doesn't fall so much as rise. The light drains out of the low ground first, the fog going from white to gray to the color of nothing, and the dark climbs the slope toward the station until only the ridge behind me still held any gold. I was on the porch when the last of it went, because I'd stopped being able to sit still indoors. The first sound was a child crying, downslope, below the tree line, where the ground fell away into the drainage. Not a coyote. I'd told myself coyotes for 3 days, and I knew in one breath that this was not that. It was a child, young, the exhausted hitching cry of a kid who's been lost long enough to give up on being heard and started crying just to keep from being alone. Every year of my life pulled me toward it. I actually took a step. My boot came down on the top stone, and I felt the pull in my whole body. The muscle memory of 1,000 runs toward 1,000 people who needed hands. Then a man's voice from the same dark. "Help. Somebody please. My daughter." And then, under both of them, threaded between, a third voice said my name. Danny. Not warm this time, just certain. Something that knew me. Rule 2. Anything crying or calling or asking your name below the tree line after dusk is not a person. Log the time. Do not log a location. Do not go down. I got the logbook. I want you to understand what that cost, because I'm not proud of how it felt. It felt like the 4 seconds all over again. Except this time, I was choosing the stillness, choosing it with my eyes open while a child begged in the dark. My hand was shaking so hard, the pen skated. I wrote the time. 6:52 p.m. Just the time. The rule said no location. And though I didn't understand why yet, I obeyed the part I understood least. Because Boyd had said the stupid-sounding ones were the ones that got you. The crying moved. It climbed the slope toward me. Closer, closer, and then at the tree line, exactly at the last row of trees where the open ground began. It stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like a needle lifted off a record. Right at the edge, as if the edge were a wall. It stopped where the rule said it couldn't cross. I didn't sleep. I sat up with the stove and the logbook, and somewhere in that long night, I decided I needed proof for myself that staying still had been right, and not just another failure wearing a new uniform. So I pulled down the old logbooks Boyd had left, the ones gone soft with damp, and I started to read. Before I opened those books, I sat in the dark and did the thing I'd come up the mountain to stop doing. I turned it on myself. Here is what nobody tells you about guilt. It's patient, and it's a shapeshifter. For months, my guilt had one shape. I froze. I didn't move, and someone paid for the 4 seconds I lost. That was the whole weight of it. Freezing was the sin. Movement was what I'd failed to do. And now the mountain had handed me the exact opposite and made it just as damning. Tonight, I hadn't frozen. Tonight, I'd made a choice, clear-headed, and the choice was to sit on a porch and let a child cry itself out in the dark. I obeyed a rule. I stayed still on purpose, and the stillness felt identical, from the inside to the worst thing I'd ever done. Same tight chest, same dry mouth, same voice underneath telling me that a real person, a good person, would already be running down that slope with a flashlight and a med kit. That's the trap the whole place is built on, though I couldn't see the full architecture yet. It takes whatever you are and makes your best instinct the thing that kills you. For me, it was the reflex to help. Rule 2 doesn't just forbid an action. For a medic, it forbids the one thing that makes her herself. I sat there and argued both sides, like I was two people. One said, "The crying stopped. at the tree line. You saw the rule work. That voice knew your name. Going down would have been suicide. The other said, "And if you're wrong?" If it really was a father and a lost girl, and you sat here writing the time in a book while they died in the cold, 40 minutes from the nearest help, the only trained hands for 9 miles, sitting on a porch obeying a laminated card, I needed to know which voice was right. Not believe. No. So I lit the lamp, pulled the oldest logbook onto my knees, and started reading by the smell of old paper and kerosene, looking for anyone who'd faced the same choice before me. The logbooks went back further than I expected, decades of rangers' handwriting, the ink changing color by era, the paper getting browner and more brittle toward the bottom of the stack. Most of it was exactly what you'd think. Weather, snow depths, generator hours, supply runs, the ordinary bones of a quiet job kept by ordinary people, one careful line at a time. But there was a column I hadn't understood on the modern forms, and now, seeing it repeated across generations of pages, it stopped me cold. Every logbook had it. A narrow column on the right, headed in the same words, no matter whose hand had ruled the page. Location, leave empty. And on every page, across every year, it was empty. Line after line, decade after decade, rangers logging times and events, and leaving that one column blank, so faithfully that the blankness became its own kind of writing. They all knew. Whatever this was, they'd all obeyed it, and none of them had explained it, because the card told them not to. Except once. Deep in the oldest book, in a cramped hand from a long time ago, someone had filled the column in. A single entry. Beside a logged time, a cry heard below the tree line. Same as mine, the ranger had written a location, a bearing and a distance. Precise. The mark of someone who did what I'd been trained to do, who heard a person in trouble and pinned it on the map so a rescue could find them. Below that line, in a different, shakier hand, the next entry. Maybe the next night, 3 words. He came to the porch that night. That was all. No incident report followed. The handwriting in that book changed a few pages later to someone new. I understood Rule 2 then, the whole of it. The crying isn't the danger. The crying is bait. And logging a location isn't record keeping. It's an invitation. Naming the place fixes the thing to a spot, commits it, lets it climb the last distance from the tree line to the door. My time-only entry, my shaking hand, refusing to write the bearing I could have sworn I knew, had kept it downslope. The rule worked. I had my proof. It didn't feel the way I'd hoped. It felt like standing over a diagnosis you didn't want confirmed. And it pulled me deeper. Because now I had to know what else those soft brown pages were hiding. Once you know a place keeps secrets in its paperwork, you can't stop reading it. I went through the logbooks for 2 more nights, stove-fed, lamp low, working backward and forward through the decades. And I started paying attention to the trail register, the separate book, the sign-in log for hikers passing through Hensley Gap. Here's what a trail register is supposed to be. Hikers stop, they write their name, the date, where they're headed. Maybe a cheerful line about the weather. It's a safety tool. If someone goes missing, searchers check the register to see who was on the trail and when. Ordinary, bureaucratic, boring, which is exactly what I'd wanted. The Hensley Gap register was full. Every day had at least one name. Winter, deep winter, snowed-in weeks where I hadn't seen a soul, and the road was impassable. Still, names. That was strange enough on its own. But it was when I started actually reading the names that the floor tilted, because I recognized some of them, not from the trail, from the news. I'd spent 11 years half listening to bad stories, and a few of these names snagged on that memory. Hikers who'd made regional headlines when they vanished. A woman lost in a state park 2 ranges east. A pair of brothers who disappeared off a trail that isn't even in these mountains. That's hours from here. A completely different forest. People who, as far as any newspaper knew, had never been within 100 miles of Hensley Gap. And yet, here they were, signed in the register, in handwriting, on dates that matched roughly when they'd gone missing somewhere else entirely. I sat with the book open on my knees and made myself say the obvious thing out loud, because saying it made it real enough to fight. This register isn't recording who came to Hensley Gap. It's recording who was taken. From here, from far away, from anywhere. And someone, some ranger, every ranger, for 90 years has kept it full. That was when I remembered the 3rd rule and understood with a sick lurch what it had been asking me to do since the day I arrived. The snow came in hard that day, not a squall of wall, the kind that erases the road and the ridge and reduces the world to the porch rail and the white beyond it. No hiker was reaching Hensley Gap. No hiker had reached it in weeks. The trail register would end the day the way every real day up there ended. Blank. And Rule 3 said blank was not allowed. If the register does not show a new name each day, write one yourself before midnight. Never write your own. I'd been telling myself, in the comfortable early days, that Rule 3 was search and rescue theater, keep the book looking active. I didn't believe that anymore. Not after Rule 1's second voice. Not after the location line. Not after the names of the missing signed in from 100 miles away. I knew now what filling that book meant, or I knew enough to be afraid of it. And I sat at the desk as the light failed, with the pen in my hand, and could not make it move. I flipped back to Boyd's last entries, looking for, I don't know what, permission, maybe, and I found it. The final name in Boyd's handwriting, dated his last full day, was a name I was almost certain belonged to no one. Slightly too plain, a placeholder shape to it. He'd done it. Whatever this cost, he'd paid it right up to the end. And then he'd fled down the mountain the moment I arrived to take the pen from him. 11:40 on the clock, the stove ticking, the snow against the glass with a sound like fingertips. I invented a name. I made it up out of nothing. A person who had never lived saw Aldrich, and I wrote it in the register in my own hand, the date beside it. And I did not, per the rule, write my own name anywhere near it. The moment the pen lifted, the station went quiet. Not ordinary quiet. The snow fingers against the window stopped. The stove's tick stopped. The generator hum I'd stopped hearing days ago dropped out and left a silence so total it had pressure. And then, from somewhere in the stone around me, came a long, soft release of air. An exhale. Something, somewhere, had gotten what it was owed. and was satisfied. I understood then that I wasn't hiding from it. I was feeding it. I had just written a life into a ledger to buy myself one more day, and it had thanked me by breathing out. I didn't sleep, and in the morning I started watching the fog. After the name in the register, I couldn't look at the fog the same way. Before, it had been scenery, the pretty milk blue pooling in the low ground that I'd photographed on my second morning, like a tourist. Now I watched it the way you watch water rising against a levee, because it was rising. It came earlier each day. The first mornings, it had kept to the drainage, well below the tree line, burning off by mid-morning. Now it lingered past noon, and it climbed. I started marking it against the porch steps without meaning to, the way you check a flood mark on a wall. By the second afternoon after the register, the fog had come all the way up the open ground and was lapping at the bottom stone step of the porch. And then it held there. That's the part I can't make sound as wrong on paper as it felt standing there. Fog doesn't hold. Fog drifts, thins, moves with the air. This sat against the first step at a clean line, the way water finds a level, and it stayed at that line for over an hour while the wind came steady down the ridge and should have torn it apart. It wasn't drifting. It was measuring, testing the height of a thing it already knew the shape of. Rule 4 surfaced whole. If the fog rises above the second stone step, go inside and do not open any door until it recedes, even if you can see someone standing in it. I'd filed that one under liability theater, back when I still had the luxury. Now I stood on my own porch and understood it was a treaty line. The second step was a boundary someone had drawn a long time ago. And the fog knew exactly where it was, and it was working its way up to see whether I did too. I found myself sweeping the porch, sweeping it clean, obsessively, as if a tidy porch were a stronger wall than a dirty one, as if any of it mattered against the thing sitting one step below my boots. I was still out there, broom in hand, when the relay line inside the station crackled, and Boyd's voice came through it, and he finally told me the truth. I nearly didn't answer it. The relay line rang with a flat, mechanical buzz, and after the second voice at 7:04, I trusted nothing that came through a speaker. But this was the landline relay, the wired one, and when I picked it up, the voice on the other end was ragged and human in a way the early voice had never been. "It's Boyd. Don't say anything. Just listen. I don't have long on this line." I said his name. He talked over me. "You've read the card by now. You've had a few of them come true, or you wouldn't have picked up." A breath, wet, like he was talking through his hand. "I need to tell you the thing the card doesn't. I broke Rule 5 once, years back. Card came up with a photo of the door. You'll know it when you see it. And I was tired and stubborn, and I slept inside anyway. Told myself it was superstition." A long pause. "I lost a week. Whole week, gone out of my head, no memory of it. And I lost Reyes." "Who's Reyes?" "My partner. That season, they still ran the station, 2 at a time." His voice cracked on it. "After that week, Reyes wasn't in any of my reports. Wasn't in the roster. Service had no record he'd ever been posted there. But he's in the register, Danny. Go look. He's signed in as a visitor. That's where he is now. That's the only place he is. I gripped the receiver. Cold plastic. My hand not steady. The rules aren't protection, Boyd said, fast now, like he could feel the line failing. That's what I got wrong for years. They're not keeping it out. They're the terms. You keep the terms, it stays fed, and it leaves the trails alone. And it takes what it's owed on schedule instead of taking whoever it wants. You break the terms, it takes it out of you. Just get to the handover. Just get to your replacement. Hand them the card and get down the mountain before the line died. Not hung up. Died that flat electronic nothing. No dial tone. I stood holding a dead receiver with the fog at my first step. And I understood. I hadn't been surviving anything. I'd been paying a debt I inherited on behalf of a thing I'd never seen. That night, it came up to the second step to see my face. It waited for dusk, the way it always did. I'd bolted the door, and I was watching through the small window beside it when the fog began to climb off the first step. It came up slow, unhurried, the level rising along the stone, the way the tide comes up a piling. And I counted with it, out loud, because my own voice was the only thing keeping me in the room. First step, the riser between. And then it crested the second step, poured over the edge of it, and pooled against the door itself. And I did what the rule said. I did not touch the latch. Inside the fog, a figure resolved, not appeared. Resolved the way a shape comes clear when you've been staring into static, and your eye finally assembles it. A man, standing at the bottom of the door in the white, close enough that on a clear night, I'd have seen the pores of his skin. He was patient. His hands were at his sides. Something about the proportion of him was wrong in a way I couldn't name. The stillness, too complete. A body that wasn't spending any effort on being a body. Then he said my name. And the horror of it was that he said it in two voices at once. The warm dispatch voice from 704, layered exactly over Boyd's tired human rasp from the phone. Both mouths, one word, perfectly synced. Reyes, I thought, or the thing wearing the idea of Reyes, assembled out of a photo it had never seen, and a grief it had only overheard. Danny, it said, both throats. You can open it. It's cold out here. Every instinct I had, the helping instinct, 11 years deep, leaned my whole body toward the latch. It was cold out there. There was a person out there. That's what the reflex screamed. And the reflex is the thing this place eats. I put my hands behind my back. I actually did that. Gripped my own wrist behind me like I was arresting myself. And I said nothing, because the rule said not to open the door, and said nothing about my voice. But I didn't trust my voice not to become an opening. It waited 3 hours. I know, because I watched the clock. It stood at the second step and said my name in those two voices and other voices, and once in the crying child voice from the tree line, and I stood behind my own door and did not open it. Then, near midnight, the fog sank. The level dropped down the steps, and the figure went down with it, like it was made of the same water, and the porch was empty. I did not sleep, and in 3 days, my camera cards were due to be swapped. I clung to the routine after that. I need you to understand how much a routine can hold a person together, because it's the only thing that held me. the generator log, the snow stakes, the 4 o'clock check. Each ordinary task was a plank I laid across the drop, and I walked from plank to plank because the alternative was looking down. The camera card swap was on the schedule for that morning, so I did it. Rule 5, though by now I'd stopped pretending any of them were just chores. 3 cameras, weatherproof boxes strapped to trees on the approaches to the station, motion triggered, running day and night. I'd been swapping the cards every 3rd day since I arrived, and the footage had been nothing. Deer stepping through the frame, snow falling in the infrared like static. Once a fox, mostly just me on my own patrols, looking smaller and more tired each cycle. I pulled all 3 cards, put fresh ones in, and brought them back to the station to review on the laptop, because I wasn't going to sit outside near the tree line to do it anymore. The first 2 cards were ordinary: deer, snow, my own boots. I watched myself sweep the porch, and it looked, from the camera's distance, like a woman performing a small, pointless ritual against something enormous, which is exactly what it was. The 3rd card was the one aimed back towards the station from the far tree. I scrolled its timestamps, and everything was ordinary until, near the end, the numbers jumped. Most frames stepped forward a few minutes apart, motion to motion. Then there was a single frame, stamped 3:03 a.m., that didn't belong to any sequence, no frames around it, no motion leading in or out, just one image dropped into the night by itself. And the frame count said the camera had taken a photo that, given where it was pointed, and what could possibly have moved in front of it at 3 in the morning, should not have existed at all. I put the cursor on it. My mouth had gone dry, that straw breath tightness climbing back into my chest. I opened the 3:03 frame. The frame was the front door of the station, not the view the camera had. That camera was strapped to a tree at the edge of the clearing, pointed at the approach, and from its angle, you could see the station's flank and a slice of the porch, nothing more. I knew its field of view by heart. I'd been reviewing it for weeks. This photo was the front door, straight on, from about 6 feet away. From outside, at night, taken from a position where no camera of mine stood from the middle of the porch, at the height of a standing person, looking directly at the door I had bolted and stood behind 3 nights before. The infrared caught the grain of the wood, the bolt, the laminated card just visible through the window beside it, its edges catching a little light. Something had stood on my porch at 3:03 in the morning, at the exact spot where the figure in the fog had waited, and it had looked at my door the way I look at things I intend to open. And that look had come out the other end of a camera bolted to a tree 40 feet away, as if the thing could put its seeing wherever it wanted, and the camera had simply recorded what it chose to show me. Rule 5 is not vague. If any card shows a photo of the station's front door taken from outside at night, do not sleep inside that night. Sleep in the truck. I read it off the laminated card 3 times, standing there, and then I looked around the room, the warm stone, the stove, the cot, the bolted door that it held, the only safe place I had, the one refuge in 9 cold miles. And the rule was telling me that tonight it wasn't a refuge. Tonight, the door in that photograph was a door the thing had already, in some sense, come through, that seeing the inside meant it could reach the inside. So I gathered blankets and the laminated card and my coat, and I went out to the cold truck to sleep, sitting up behind a steering wheel, exiling myself from the only warmth on the mountain, because a photograph told me the warmth had turned against me. And in my hurry to obey Rule 5, coat half on, arms full of blankets, I walked out and left the stove to burn down behind me, and forgot Rule 6 entirely. I was in the truck, blankets banked around me, engine off to save fuel, watching the dark station through the windshield, when I saw the chimney. It had stopped smoking. For weeks, that thin gray thread had been the one constant, the sign of the fire I fed morning and night. Now the chimney stood clean against the last gray of the sky, nothing rising from it, and I understood what I'd done. In my rush to obey the rule about the truck, I'd let the stove die. I'd broken off the routine mid-plank and left the fire to go out, and I hadn't fed it before I left, and now it was going cold. And Rule 6 came up out of me all at once, like a swallowed thing. Never let the wood stove go fully cold. If it dies, relight it before the next hour changes on the clock. Cold stone remembers. I looked at my watch. 11:52. 8 minutes to the hour. Relight it before the hour changes, the card said. And I'd been laughing at cold stone remembers only weeks ago. And I wasn't laughing now, because I'd learned the price of every other rule in this book, and I was not going to be the one who tested this one. And there it was, the trap, clean and total. Rule 5 said, do not go inside tonight. Rule 6 said, go inside now and relight the fire before midnight. 2 rules, mine to keep, pulling in exact opposite directions, and 8 minutes on the clock to choose which one would kill me. I sat frozen for one of those 8 minutes, doing exactly the thing I'd sworn I'd never do again, nothing. Then I did the math, the only way a medic can. You treat the fastest killer first. The photo was a maybe. Cold stone remembers was a rule I'd never seen fail. And something in the phrasing frightened me more than the door ever had. I ran, boots on gravel, breath tearing, into the dark station where I wasn't supposed to be, and I threw kindling on the coals with shaking hands and worked the damper and blew on the embers until my head swam and the flame caught. Orange light came up the stone walls. I looked at my watch. 11:59. The fire held. I'd kept Rule 6, and in keeping it, I'd spent the night inside. In the station, the photo told me not to sleep, in obeying one term by breaking another, which I understood then was the whole design. I didn't sleep inside in the end. I kept the fire fed from the doorway, and I sat on the threshold itself, half in and half out, one boot on the porch and one on the stone floor, threading the needle between 2 rules that couldn't both be kept. And while I sat there in the orange light, I finally did the thing I should have done the first night. I got a pencil and a sheet of paper, and I wrote all 7 rules out, and I looked at them together as a system instead of one at a time. That's when I saw it. The architecture. Every rule protected you from one thing, and in doing so, exposed you to another. Obey Rule 5 and flee to the truck, and you risk letting the stove die and breaking Rule 6. Obey Rule 6 and run back inside, and you're sleeping where Rule 5 forbids. The 7:10 window keeps the early voice out, but makes you sit alone with the radio in the dark minutes before it. Rule 3 keeps the register full, but makes you the one who fills it, makes you complicit, makes you feed the thing to keep it fed. Rule 2 keeps the crying at the tree line, but demands you sit still while a child screams. Rule 4 keeps the door shut, but makes you stand behind it while the thing you love or fear says your name. It wasn't a set of protections. It was a machine for producing one unavoidable mistake. Keep it running perfectly, and it costs you a piece of yourself every day, the way it had cost me the helping reflex I built my life on. Slip once, at any joint, and it takes the rest. And I understood the timing then, too. My last scheduled night before the handover was coming. My replacement was due when the pass cleared. Boyd had run early to hand it off. The season ends, a new ranger comes, and the machine wants, I could feel it, wanting a clean transfer. Everything paid up, the ledger current, before it lets you go. Which meant the machine would want its due, all of it, on the last night. Every rule, at once, in one night, to see if I'd earned the road down. I looked out the door at the low ground. The fog was already rising, earlier than it had ever risen, and the light hadn't even fully gone. The last night didn't build. It detonated all at once, the way a mass casualty scene detonates everything arriving in the same instant, each thing screaming to be first. The radio came alive at 7:04, the warm voice using my name before the real window. I let it talk to an empty room, and I did not answer. And I watched the clock crawl towards 7:10 while it said, "Danny, Danny, you cut out," in the tone of someone who loves you and is only a little worried. The register sat open on the desk, blank, and the clock ran toward midnight, and Rule 3 pulled at me to fill it. Below the tree line, the crying started, right at dusk, and this time it didn't stay one voice. It cycled child, then man, then something that had learned my mother's voice from somewhere it had no right to have been. The stove needed feeding on the hour, every hour, or Rule 6 would take the night. And the fog was climbing the steps, first, second, cresting, pouring against the door. And my dead phone lit up on its own on the desk, with a new photograph of the front door taken from outside. I want to tell you, I panicked. I didn't. Something older than panic took over, the thing I'd spent months hating, and had come up the mountain to bury the triage brain. The paramedic's cold clock. When everything is dying at once, you don't feel, you sort. Airway first, fastest killer first. I moved through that station, treating rules like patience, on the hour to the stove, past the desk without touching the register, past the radio without keying it, behind the door without opening it, breathing through the straw in my chest and not stopping, because stopping is a one thing triage doesn't allow. The skill I'd come there to lose was the only thing keeping me alive. At 11:58, I fed the stove. At 7:10, I'd answered the real voice. I'd kept 6 rules through the longest night of my life, moving between them like a nurse between beds, and every one of them held. And then, near dawn, the crying below the tree line changed into the one voice I had no defense against, and made me the offer I'd been dreading since the day I arrived. It waited until the sky in the east had just begun to gray, until I was hollowed out and shaking and almost through. And then the crying below the tree line stopped being a stranger's. It was the child from my last call, the one from the 4 seconds. I had never told anyone. That voice never described it, never written it down, kept it locked in the one room in myself I don't open. And it came up the slope, out of the fog, in exactly that voice, pitch perfect. And it was not crying anymore. It was calling my name, gently, the way you'd call to wake someone. And then it said the thing I have wanted to hear every day for a year. It said it wasn't my fault. It said the 4 seconds didn't matter. It said I could come down now into the trees, and it would forgive me, and I could put the weight down at last. I want you to understand that this was worse than the door. The figure at the door only had my fear. This had my wound. This had reached into the one locked room and taken the one thing I'd have crawled over broken glass to receive, and it was holding it out to me from below the tree line, where Rule 2 said, "Nothing that calls to you is a person." I stood in the doorway with the fog at my knees, and the forgiveness I'd been starving for, pouring up out of the dark in a dead child's voice, and every part of me that was still a person wanted to walk down into the trees and be told again that it wasn't my fault. I got the logbook. My hand was steadier than it had any right to be. I wrote the time, only the time, no location. I did not write the bearing. I could have sworn I knew the exact spot in the trees where the voice was, and I did not go down. I refused the forgiveness. I refused the only absolution I have ever been offered, because taking it would have killed me, and knowing that did not make it hurt less. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I am not sure, even now, that it was the brave thing. It was only the surviving thing. The voice called once more. Then the sun came over the ridge, and the fog withdrew down the slope, and I stood in the doorway of a station I had kept, and understood, at last, exactly what I'd been keeping it for. In daylight, emptied out, I finally let myself see the whole shape of it, and the shape was worse than any monster I could have been handed, because it wasn't a monster I'd been fighting. It was a contract I'd been honoring. I'd had it backward from the first night, the way Boyd had it backward for years. I thought the rules were a wall between me and the thing in the fog. Protection, a defense that a clever, careful ranger could hold. That's the comforting version. The version that lets you feel like the hero of a siege. The truth is that the station isn't a fort. It's a leash and a feeding schedule, and I was the keeper. The thing in the fog was never trying to get past the rules. The rules are how it's kept content. The register kept full, one name a day, real or invented. It doesn't seem to care which is how it's fed. A steady, small tribute, so it never gets hungry enough to go down and take from the trails, from the hikers, from the wide world where people would notice and search and eventually find this place. The crying it's allowed, the fog to the second step it's allowed, the tribute in the ledger it's owed. Keep the terms, and it stays high on this ridge, fed and patient. And the missing that make the news elsewhere stay a trickle instead of a flood. Reyes is in the register because a term got broken. and it collected directly. That's what breaking a rule does. It doesn't let the thing in. It just changes what it takes and from whom. Every ranger who ever kept these logs was doing what I was doing, not surviving it, managing it. 90 years of ordinary people feeding a name a day into a book to keep a thing on a leash so the rest of us could hike and camp and drive up pretty roads and never know. I hadn't beaten anything. I'd made my payments on schedule, and the mountain was letting me leave because the ledger was current. I was still standing in the doorway with that settling into me when I heard an engine far down, laboring up the 9-mile road. My replacement. The pass had cleared, and I understood the cruelest term was the one I hadn't been tested on yet. She got out of a mud-spattered truck at the bottom of the steps, and she was young, and she was so relieved to see me that it broke something in my chest. Late 20s, maybe. New boots, like mine had been. A backpack she'd clearly packed with care. She came up toward the porch with her hand out and her face open. The face of someone who'd taken a quiet posting to fix something in herself. Because I know that face, now I'd worn it up this same road. "You must be Vasquez," she said. "God, I'm glad you're still here. That road. Nobody warned me about that road." She laughed. I don't even want to write her name. I'll keep that much from it, at least here." "You made it," I said. That was all I trusted myself to say. And there it was, the last rule, the 7th, the one I hadn't been tested on because it can only be tested once, at the very end. When your replacement arrives, hand them the card and leave before dark. Do not describe what happened. Everything I am wanted to warn her. 11 years of running toward people who needed to be warned, of grabbing arms and saying, "Stop, don't. It's not safe." The whole reflex I'd nearly died a dozen times refusing to obey stood up in me now and demanded I tell this young woman with the new boots to get back in her truck and drive down the mountain and never come back. But I understood the term now, and I understood why Boyd had said, "Only read it and believe it," and then fled. If you explain the rules stop working. The belief has to be earned the way I earned it, one impossible night at a time. Or it isn't belief. It's just a story the person doesn't quite trust. And the not quite trusting is what gets them killed at 7:04, at the tree line, at the door. To warn her was to doom her. To stay silent was to doom her differently, more slowly, with a chance. The whole cruelty of the place was distilled into that one choice on the porch. And the choice was mine. And there was no version of it that let me be a good person. I made it. I made it standing on the second step, where the fog will climb for her some night this winter. And then I got in my truck. I took the laminated card off the inside of the door. My fingers didn't want to let go of it. It had gone soft at the edges from my hands, too, now, added to all the hands before mine. And I held it out to her, the way Boyd had held out the keys, keeping the extra distance, though I don't think she noticed. "Read this," I said, "before dark. Every line." She turned it over, scanned it, and her face did what mine must have done. That flicker of amusement, fighting with unease. "These are a little intense," she said, and half smiled, waiting for me to smile back and tell her it was a hazing thing. a tradition, a joke the seasonals play. I didn't smile. "Read it," I said, "and believe it." The words came out of me in Boyd's exact cadence, load-bearing on that last word. And I heard the cycle close in my own mouth, heard myself become the wiry stranger on the porch who wouldn't come down the steps, the link handing the chain to the next link. She heard something in it too, because the half-smile faded, and she looked at me differently, and she asked the question I'd known she would ask, the question I'd asked Boyd's taillights. "What happened up here?" I got in the truck. I know how that sounds. I know what it is to be the person who drives away from someone who needs an answer. I've spent this whole confession telling you I built my life on not being that person. But the rule is the rule, and the rule keeps her alive better than the truth would. And that is the single hardest thing about this whole place, that the cruelty and the mercy are the same act. I started the engine. In the mirror, as I pulled away, I saw her already reading the card, standing on the second step, the exact stone the fog would crest for her some night soon. She didn't wave. She was reading. I drove down before dark, as required. 9 miles of switchbacks, the fog thinning as I dropped, my signal coming back 1 bar at a time, the world reassembling itself into a place where none of this had happened. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the road down was the end. It's months later now. I'm in a city. There is no ridge, no 9-mile road, no fog that climbs against the wind. There is a locked door and a radiator and traffic under the window all night. And by every measure, I escaped. I made my payments. I kept the terms. I handed off the card, and the mountain let me go. So tell me why I still do these things. I don't let the heat in this apartment die all the way down. I keep the radiator ticking, even on the warm nights, even in a building where the pipes will never freeze. Because some animal part of me hears cold stone remembers, and will not test it 9 miles from anywhere, or here, where nothing should be listening. I never answer my phone on the first ring, or before the top of the hour if I can help it. I let it go a beat, the way I let the radio go to 7:10, because a voice that answers too eagerly is a voice I've learned not to trust. And on the nights the day has felt too empty, too quiet, too much like a blank page, I take out a notebook, and I write a stranger's name in it. A person who never lived. Just one. Never my own. I don't know if anything is owed here. I don't know if anything followed me down the mountain, or whether I carried it down myself, folded up small inside the person the mountain made me. I can't tell anymore where the rules end and I begin. Maybe that's all the station ever really does to a keeper. Maybe that's the last term. The one that isn't on the card. That you don't leave it up there. You bring it home, and you keep paying quietly in a warm apartment for the rest of your life, so that some part of you can believe the debt is still being kept current. The girl with the new boots is up there right now. It's winter. The fog is climbing her steps. I hope she's reading the card. I hope she believes it. I never let the heat die.